The Truth on How to Be Successful in Life with David Neagle, episode 250. Are you ready to make your law firm a profit-generating machine that will free up your time and skyrocket your impact? With more than 2 decades of business growth experience and having proven that you can be successful while prioritizing your family and your impact, introducing the Profit with Law podcast. I am your host, the creator of the firm differentiator 10X Effect, Moshe Amsel. Well, hello and welcome to another amazing guest interview here on the Profit with Law podcast. I'm your host, Moshe Amsel, and I'm super excited for the conversation we're going to have today. I know I start every podcast guest interview that way, and I'm always excited. The truth is I am, because we always have rock stars here on the show. Everybody has a unique, amazing insight and really experiences that is unique to them and that they can share with you. But the person that I have today was one of the keynote speakers at the Law Firm Growth Summit, and it was by far the most liked session of the entire event. People had they had these mindset shifts that happen, and we talk about, some people are like, well, what's a mindset shift? Our guest was able to change the way that they're thinking, which was a positive impact on their law firm post-event. And it's hard to do that with a 1-hour presentation, and he did. So the person that I'm talking about is David Neagle, and he is the founder of the multi-million-dollar global coaching company Life Is Now, and he's just amazing. There's so many attorneys that have gone through his coaching in order to facilitate the growth in their practice. There's a lot of successful law firm owners, even law firm coaches that I know that have been David's clients. So I'm super excited to be able to have David here for a candid conversation where we get to talk about anything that we settle on in the course of our conversation. So let me give you the official bio that his team sent over to me. David is the founder of the multi-million-dollar global coaching company Life Is Now, helping thousands of entrepreneurs, experts, and self-employed professionals gain the confidence and find the right mindset to increase their revenue, turning their endeavors into 7- and 8-figure ventures. Being in the coaching and mentorship industry for more than 20 years, David has worked alongside other well-known mentors like Bob Proctor and Tony Robbins, and his clients include many well-known people, including New York Times #1 best-selling author Jen Sincero. Because of the results his clients have achieved along with his dedication, David's coaching has expanded to more than 30 countries, and he has been featured on Forbes, CBS, NBC, Wall Street Journal, Inc., Entrepreneur, and Fox. He's also the best-selling author of The Millions Within, a book focusing on intention, focus, and awareness to build your dream business and life. Wow, I have a lot of aspiring to do to add to my list of stuff, because David is very accomplished. David is also the host of the Successful Mind podcast. Go check his show out. Now, I'm going to jump in and bring David on. And we're going to have a conversation, and I'm super excited to share that with you. David, welcome to the show.
Moshe, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here.
And it's my honor to have you here on my show. David, I want to start with something simple. People don't know who you are. They want to know a little bit more about you. I gave the official story, but how did you end up in coaching and the success that you seem to have amassed in your wake? Somebody once told me, every overnight success that you see is an overnight success 10 years in the making, or something like that, right? Yeah. So what's the story? How did you end up where you are today?
I early in my life, I was making decisions that were causing me to really suffer because they were such poor decisions. My parents split up when I was rather young, and I found myself kind of alone on the streets of Chicago. My mom was very absent for a long period of time. I wanted nothing more than to escape the environment that I was in, but I had no idea how to actually do that. I was a poor student in school. I quit high school when I was 17, did a short stint in the Army, came out, got married, and immediately had a couple of children. But I had no skill set, no education. So I found myself driving a forklift to make a living. And I was working about 6.5 days a week, all the overtime that they would give me. And I was absolutely miserable. I could not pay my bills. My wife worked also. We did have an overspending problem, but that really wasn't the problem. That we were just not able to make it. And it caused me to wake up one morning and find out that my car was repossessed. I ended up filing bankruptcy. I had to leave the apartment building that we were living in the middle of the night because we couldn't afford the increase in rent. Had to move to a really lower end neighborhood, live next door to a drug dealer that used to beat his wife. And my attitude was just getting worse and worse. I was getting angry about the situation that I was in. I was blaming everybody else. And yet I was still trying to figure out a way, how do I turn this around? And I was getting nowhere fast. Things were just progressively, like rapidly getting worse. And I had one night I had an emotional meltdown while I was loading this trailer. I was disciplined twice before I even started that day. And I just said, God, show me something, show me some way to turn this around. Because I did reach the point where I realized that I had ended up in the situation that I was because of poor decisions. But when I asked people to tell me, how do I turn this around? The only response that I got was, you should have never quit high school to begin with. And it was like, yeah, I kind of get that now, but what do I do? And they said, just work hard and work all the overtime you can and just stick with what you're doing. And it was a nowhere job. It was never going to go anywhere. So I knew I needed some kind of an education if I was going to advance. And every day I would go home and I was just humiliated that I couldn't take care of my family. It was so gut-wrenching for me that I had created this result in my life. So I have this meltdown, like I'm just crying my eyes out, sitting on this forklift, and this voice that seemed almost audible to me, obviously it was in my head, but it said, David, change your attitude. And I had no idea what that meant, Moshe. I literally no clue, but it kind of snapped me out of this unbelievable expression of emotion and frustration. And I said, okay, if I'm going to change my attitude, if that would even make a difference, what would I actually change? So I looked at the owner of the company that I was working for. It was a food import company just outside of Chicago. And the story was, to my understanding, was the guy built this. I mean, most of the imported goods that we have in the United States come from this guy who started this company. He built it starting in his garage. And somehow I related to that. Like, he didn't have this big education either, and he was able to be very successful. So I said, what's the difference between him and me as far as an attitude goes? And I recognized three things. One, he must have liked what he did or loved what he did, because he went from starting it in his garage to a major business. I think they were doing like 500 million a year when I worked there.
Wow.
And I thought, I hate what I do. Every fiber of my being hated it. I was so angry. And I thought, okay, that's one thing. I thought he must have done a good job in order for it to grow this way. And I was constantly not doing a good job. I didn't care. I did not care if I did a good job. I was working to go home, not to do a good job. And the third thing was that there was this behavior that he had that stood out to me. And here's what it was. I worked in the warehouse. Most of the people in the warehouse didn't even speak English. This guy he was always dressed to the nines, amazing suit. He would come through with other executives for other companies and show them the automation that they created in this warehouse. But he would never walk past an employee without saying, hello, how are you? How's your family? How's your day? Whatever. And what stood out to me was that he respected people just for who they were. I was kind of raised to believe that successful people were assholes. So this was something very different than what my internal experience of success was. So I said, okay, I'm going to change 3 things. I'm going to act like I love what I do. I'm going to do every job to the best of my ability, which nobody had ever taught me to do. And I'm going to start treating people with total respect, because I was not being a nice person to people. Because I was so angry at myself, I was taking it out on everybody else. So my original goal was, how do I go from 20,000 a year to 40? I mean, I was very immature. I thought if I could get to 40, that'll change everything. I didn't, realize that that was kind of a crazy idea, but it would help. So I said, all right, this is the goal. Let me see what actually changes if I change my attitude. And in 30 days, my income tripled after I did this. And I was astounded. I was so shocked that everything changed in my life in 30 days. And I thought to myself, this wasn't luck. Everybody around me was like, you got really lucky. Don't blow this. This only happens once in a lifetime. And I'm thinking, this is not luck. I did something, but I didn't know what the hell that I did. So not only did I embrace what I did, but I decided I was going to find out exactly what I did so that I could actually learn it and keep increasing it. And that sent me on a course of study for about 7 years. So, that was the foundation of my change. And then, of course, that just continued on. And then it was about 7 years later that I actually started my own business. And it didn't start off as coaching, by the way. It started off as just doing seminars. Coaching came a few years into it. But that's how it happened.
It's an incredible story. And what I find the most incredible is the fact that you were able to change. Essentially by changing these 3 things, you changed who you were, at least to everybody else, right? You were the same person, but the experience that everybody else had interacting with you must have been night and day when you started treating them with respect, when you started caring about your job. And that is, clearly that how you treat others and how you approach life gets reflected back at you. And that's what you were able to experience. But so many people believe that this is who I am and I can't change it. And that, so from the entire story, that's the most incredible piece, is that you were able to effectuate that change, and really on your own without any help. You just came to this realization that I got to do something different, and did it. So that's an amazing observation to see. There's parts of your story that I related to. I didn't grow up the way you grew up, but my kids did. So my older girls, I went through a divorce. Their mom became an alcoholic, and I didn't know, but there was a lot of abuse and neglect happening when they were with her. And it wasn't until a few years into it that I discovered what was going on, and then, took them, completely, 100% custody of them, and really got them the help that they needed. But I totally can see every step that happened as a result of the neglect that you had growing up, and just not having, the guidance that you needed to get to where you are. But what's interesting is that our audience is educated people, right? So, most of them probably had a normal childhood. Most of them had their parents put them through college. They went to law school. So yet they're struggling, and they struggle in different areas. So it can't be that, it's the background that caused me to struggle. It can't, the circumstances that caused me to struggle. So when you work, you've worked with a lot of law firm owners over the years. What do you think it is that differentiates the ones that are highly successful from the ones that are, they're just literally every day is a battle to try to win at this game, and they just don't seem to get it?
Yeah, well, you said something that's really interesting, and it's very true. A person could actually have a perfect childhood, but if they're not taught how to be successful, which is not something that we actually teach the average person, we teach them how to survive in the world, not how to be a success. So if they step into something with ambition and a desire and a vision for themselves, if they do not understand how to think successfully, if they don't understand how to think progressively for what they want, or how to create a profitable business, their whole approach is about survival, and that's why they get stuck. It seems completely normal the way that they're approaching their business and their life, but they don't understand why they're not getting the result. And they don't know that it has to do with they literally were not taught how to be really successful versus how to just survive in this world.
It's very interesting that you say that and you point that out. And I never looked at it from the word survival. Like that's something I never thought about. But the reality is that that's what I do. Like when somebody comes into my world and I'm coaching them on growing a profitable law firm, the first thing we do is what I call the 90-day law firm turnaround. And that program is entirely around stopping from just letting the law firm happen to you and creating a plan that you're going to get to your end result. So we spend 90 days really hashing out, how am I going to get to the goal that I want, so that I can then execute over 12 months to make that happen. And really the crux of that is, up until now, you've been in survival mode. Up until now, you've been basically just, how do I keep up with the client work? How do I get the next dollar to come in? And you're constantly just reacting to the situation that you're in, which is survival. Survival is always reactionary, right? It's how do I react to this situation? And as long as we're in reactionary mode, we can't move the needle forward.
Right. And the other thing is that with attorneys, with doctors, anybody that has a professional education, when they come out of school, they were taught how to be a lawyer. They were not taught how to run a business, right? Those are two very different things. If you don't understand the principles of running a business, which takes as much education as being an attorney or a doctor or a scientist, then you're moving into another entity that you really don't even understand. So it has its own principles and values and ethics and function that has to be understood and implemented in order for you to move from survival to success.
Yeah, absolutely. And I tell my clients all the time, I tell them, one of the things that you're going to hide behind, it's an excuse that we hide behind, which is, hey, they don't teach business in law school, right? I hear that all the time.
Right.
And at some point, you have to stop hiding behind that, and you have to learn how to run a business. You have to educate yourself and not say, oh, I didn't learn this. I lost the point that I wanted to make. I wanted to point out, oh yes. So I tell them that I have an MBA. I literally went to college for 3 years to get an MBA. And believe it or not, I did not learn how to run a small business with my MBA. To get an MBA, they taught me a supply chain. They taught me cost accounting. They taught me, Fortune 500 stuff that I'm never going to use. Right. But I'm educated and trained on how to be successful in business. But the reality is just like anybody else, as a business owner, I had to figure it out. And I got help. I got coaches. I have coaches in my life. I'm a firm believer in having a mentor and having somebody that you can look at and learn from, and not have to make every mistake in the book along the way. We're all going to make mistakes.
Right.
But it's, it's really true that we're not set up for success when we start.
Here's another thing though. I can't drive this home enough. All the professionals that I've worked with in my career, and I actually feel bad for them in a way, because it's like they're almost set up to fail. They're very intelligent people, right? You don't learn the things that you guys have had to learn without being really smart. And they think to themselves, I should be able to figure this out. I'm a really smart person. I've got a great education. I'm ahead of where most people ever get to in their life when it comes to education. Why can't I figure this out? And it's almost like there's this balance, and I wouldn't even say it's a balance. There's this idea between pride and shame that blocks them, because they think they should be able to do it. But there's much more to it than meets the eye. It's not simple. That's the reason why 80% of businesses are out of business in 5 years. because it's not an easy thing. I mean, it's a hell of an edge. And what you learned with the MBA, did they teach you how to market? Did they teach you how to sell? They, you know, all of the things that actually are the building blocks of a business, you don't learn that in college. You don't learn it when you go to school.
Yeah, it's so true. And what you said, I mean, it's just so profound, because I do a free coaching call in order to get somebody involved in my world, right? And I think probably 80% of the people that I do a free coaching call, one of their motivators, one of the things that they want to be successful is for their kids to be proud of them, or for them to be able to be proud of what they've built,
Yeah.
and what they've created. And it's so true that intellect and pride has so much to do with everything around, you know, how we operate, and just forcing ourselves into this box of, oh, I need to figure this out for myself, is punishing ourselves, right? Why do we do that? And we just do it because we think that there's some sort of badge of honor that I need to wear to say, hey, I did this without any help. And the reality is that when you have a gorgeous law firm with, you know, 20 people working for you, and you have more money than you ever are going to need because you're running it successfully, nobody's going to ask you, hey, did you do this yourself, or did you have some help?
Right.
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 So there's really no shame in getting help along the way.
No, but especially even in the United States, mostly people are raised with this work ethic idea that they need to do it themselves. Like there's almost this warped pride, and I did it all by myself, when you and I both know nobody ever achieves anything by themselves. You know, I mean, maybe you're the one person that had the vision or the dream. You've got the work ethic. You know, you're the one that's actually pushing that idea forward. But there's no way for us to accomplish what we want, including the income, by ourselves. It's not going to happen. The more you make, and this is the truth that I have seen, not only with myself, but with all the people that I've worked with, the more you make, the easier it is. But one of the reasons why it's easier is because you're leveraging knowledge, you're leveraging systems, you're leveraging ideas, you're leveraging being able to help more people, and you can never do that by yourself.
Absolutely. And to think that I'm the best at everything, and nobody thinks that, right? But
Right.
yet we act that way, right?
Yes.
I, over my right shoulder, I've got the book Traction on the bookshelf behind me. And Gino Wickman, in his book, he identifies that even at the top of the organization, there has to be two people. One is the visionary and one is the integrator. And it's because if you're the big picture thinker, by definition, you're not going to be good at the execution part. And if you're really good at execution, by definition, you're not going to think big enough. So you have to recognize that if at the top of the organization, there has to be two people. And clearly I start with just one. So I'm wearing both hats for a while, but the faster I can get somebody into, you know, whether you call it an office manager, or you call it your receptionist, or you call it your personal or executive assistant, you got to get somebody into that execution seat to make sure that all the minutia is happening, so that you can continue your vision and move it down the road. If I need that at the top level, how much more powerful and how much more do I need it at every other level in the business? And, there's so many examples. I mean, bookkeeping is the one example I love to use, because nobody, like 90% of business owners don't like bookkeeping, right? They don't want to, you don't want to be doing it.
Right.
And you're awful at it, yet you're doing it yourself. Why? For a few $100s, you can hand it off to somebody else. So you don't even have to hire a bookkeeper. You outsource it to a bookkeeping firm, or to Dream Builder Financial, my company, and we do your books for you. But you outsource it to somebody, and for a few $100s a month, your books are done. Why are you holding on to that? Why are you knocking your head against the wall? Why are you either spending hours doing it and not doing it well, or worse, not doing it? Well, and allowing the work to go incomplete, and therefore creating a mess around it.
Right. Well, if you come from the place of understanding that the paradigm that's controlling the behaviors based on survival, then one of the things that's based within that paradigm is the idea of control. So if I don't feel that I can let go of control to let somebody else do something because that jeopardizes my survival, it's going against my basic instinct to actually ask for help. And I remember I remember my grandfather saying something one time about, he didn't achieve much in his life, but he lived a pretty decent life. And he said one time, I've never asked anybody to help me with anything. I've always done it myself. Like this was this main source of pride for him as to what he did. But I also watched people absolutely refuse to let go of things like bookkeeping because they felt that they absolutely had to have control of those things, or even if it wasn't irresponsible in their mind, they were jeopardizing their own survival if they did.
So, David, what is the secret? Like, I mean, our listeners are listening and they're picking up on this, right? Okay, I need to cede control. I have to give up control. I have to be willing to allow somebody else to do something. Maybe I even have to be willing to allow them to do it incorrectly so that we can fix it. Then they're doing it correctly, and now I've handed it off to them. How does one overcome this need to control, and knowing that I have to be able to cede control in order to be successful?
So I think that number one, a person has to admit that they've got an issue. Really come to terms with the fact that there is a problem. Here's what this problem is. But the idea about control is based in trust. So wherever you see a person that is having a difficult time letting go of control, they also have a difficult time with trust. And the trust always starts with ourselves. Do we trust ourselves to follow through with the things that we said that we were actually going to do? Underneath that, what is very interesting is that we all, and I've found this everywhere in the world that I've gone, there's this idea that we raise children with shame and guilt. We control their behavior with shame and guilt. Shame says that there's something wrong with me, and guilt says that there's something wrong with what I've done. So at some point in time, when children start to grow up and go to school, people have to control a mass amount of students. They have to get all these kids through kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade. And shame and guilt is so painful to the human psyche. By the way, we're not born with it. It's taught to us. It's so painful to us that it's very effective in controlling behavior, especially of children. But once it gets put into their subconscious mind, it becomes a self-regulating proposition. So the idea behind it is basically this. If I make a mistake, if somebody sees me, I'm going to be ashamed and I may be rejected by people. Now, a person may say, well, listen, David, I'm a 35-year-old person. I'm an adult. I'm not really worried about being rejected. Maybe not consciously you are, but at one point in time, we actually had a biological need not to be rejected, because as babies, if you were rejected, you would die. So there's this adaptation that takes place within a human being, which is basically this. I have to agree with the authority that's around me so that I can survive. That's what happens as a child. So we develop patterns of behavior that allow us to survive our childhood, but they're rooted in survival. It's not rooted in success. So if I've never developed a successful pattern of thinking, of behavior, of showing up in the world, of actually how do I view the world, what is my perception, I move into my adult life with these patterns of survival that are rooted in the idea that I don't want to be rejected by someone. And then I start to go after the success that I want, but I'm operating from a survival pattern, not a successful pattern. So what ends up happening is that I begin to lose trust in the people that are around me. And if I cannot seem to move the needle forward successfully, I begin to lose trust in myself. As I lose trust in myself, the instinct is to control more, to control more, to control more, because I'm scared to death that I'll make a mistake. And if that mistake is exposed, people will actually reject me. So the key behind this, first and foremost, is to learn how do we actually trust ourselves. But if we're lying to ourselves, we're actually building evidence that we can't trust ourselves. And we're looking at different parts of our personality And it's like we're reinforcing that we're not that good, and nobody sees it. We put a mask on for the world so that nobody actually sees that. But inside, we have all this evidence that's building that we're actually not that good. So we're building this idea that we can't trust ourselves. In order to change it, we have to strip all of that away. We start off with the idea that you do have a problem. And the idea is, how do we rebuild trust with ourselves so that we can rebuild our self-esteem and rebuild our confidence? That then teaches us how to trust other people. Because most of the way people are actually taught to trust others is whether or not they're actually a nice person. If you remember when you were a kid, most kids are taught don't talk to strangers. But when are we taught that it's okay to actually interact with somebody that we don't know? When mom or dad says, oh, that's okay, this is a nice person. So
Right.
we begin to use this filter. If this person's a nice person, we can interact with that individual. But that is in no way a characteristic to determine whether we should trust somebody or not. So what we end up doing is we start looking for people that are nice. We start behaving nice as a matter of, this is a characteristic of how I should actually trust someone. People usually get burned when they do that. So when we start to learn to trust ourselves, we come from a completely different realization. And one of them is, am I my word? If I say I'm going to do something, will I actually follow through with it? Once we've established that with ourselves, now when I sit across the table for somebody else and I'm going to hire them or I'm going to give them a responsibility in my company, I actually know what characteristics I'm looking for as to whether or not I can trust that person. There is no more feeling of self-confidence and control that a person can experience is to actually to have a real valid way of knowing whether they can actually trust somebody else. That is more control that you will have than ever than trying to do everything yourself. So you're building confidence and self-esteem inside of yourself as a real way to actually deal with hiring and building a team and other people, because you know what to do, you know what accountability is, you know whether or not a person, if they say they're going to do something, they're actually going to do it, and you have no problem holding a person accountable because you now know how to hold yourself accountable.
So is building the confidence and self-esteem something that happens through external feedback that you're getting, or is it like how do you build on your confidence or build on your self-esteem? Typically I would think that I'm going to do something and I'm going to see that it succeeds, and that's going to make me feel more confident on the next time. But it sounds like you're describing that this is just internal work that needs to be done. So how does somebody build on it? How do you elevate the level of confidence and the level of self-esteem?
So the paradox is this. What you're saying is actually correct. If I do something and I'm getting good results, I'm going to build a good self-esteem. That's true unless you also have something that goes on. If every time I make a mistake, I'm not a good person. And we teach children that mistakes are not okay. So if I'm consistently making mistakes, I'm building evidence that I'm actually not a good person. And it comes down to literally what is more evident in your life: the great things that you've done, where you've succeeded, or how many mistakes that you've actually made. So if I want to build a solid self-esteem, it's not so much about other people telling me that I've done a good job, but it's me actually being able to look at the different points of growth that I have to go through, understanding that mistakes are part of it, not tearing myself down from it, but recognizing that I've made a mistake, owning it, and then correcting it to learn, and then getting a good result. Now I've got rock solid confidence in me, and my self-esteem begins to grow because it's not based on anything that's false or a premise of, hey, you did a great job, when inside yourself you don't feel like you did.
Yeah, this is very interesting, and it really makes you start to think about, what is really going on, like what do I really have going on deep down? Is there any insight that you can give for somebody to be able to do that self-reflection? I think that that's another thing that we're not trained to do, right? We don't, people who have been seeking help and things like that. They might have gotten into meditation or into yoga or something like that, where they start to understand that, you can actually hear your inner self, you can see yourself. But for the layperson, being able to strip down the layers and see where the problem lies, I think that itself is a challenge, right?
Extremely, because we're taught to cover our mistakes. We're not taught to put them out on the table, admit that we have one, and forget letting anybody else see that we've made a mistake, because then we get into this whole self-shaming thing. So the idea is this: a person has to look at their life and go, am I consistently experiencing problems that are not changing? Right? Are there problems in my life that are showing up over and over again, and I'm not actually changing these problems? Because if there are, what is this evidence of? It's evidence of that you see the world through a filter of a paradigm that's flawed. And when you understand what it is inside of yourself that's causing you to see it that way, then you can change it, and you can stop repeating the problems, because you're working at what is the root cause of what's actually going on here. When I work with a person, one of the things that we do when they have that problem, the first thing that we do is we take them through a core wound exercise to find out what are the core wounds inside of themselves that are literally causing them to view the world in very specific things, not everything, but very specific things that they feel that they have to protect themselves from. And here's the only thing you have to do to find out, because most people will be like, I don't have a core wound. Don't even talk to me about that. I just don't. I don't have one. Perfectly understandable response, because that's the way that we're taught. Put on the ego. Don't let anybody see a weakness, right? Write down 5 things that other people do to you that really piss you off. So if there's things that other people do to you that really anger you, anger is a defense mechanism, but it's a defense mechanism based on what? It's based on something that we are afraid of internally, but our subconscious mind doesn't want us to know what it is, because it is a survival pattern that we developed as children to make it through our life. So if you have somebody that backstabs you and that pisses you off, if you have somebody that doesn't follow through with something that you gave them to do, or they slight you, or they talk behind your back, or they cut you off, or they blame you, or they dump their problems on you, like any number of things it can actually be. Why is it that it makes you angry, right? So we actually take them through an exercise that shows them exactly what it is. Every person has the same reaction after they go through the exercise. They're like, I did not believe that I had this when you told me, and now I can't deny it. And it's unbelievable that this actually shows up everywhere in my life. But then we show them how to correct it, because it's so easily corrected once you understand what's causing the problem inside of yourself. And it really lets a person develop their own personal power as an individual, because they don't have these hidden little weaknesses inside of themselves that they're so afraid somebody else is going to find out about. That keeps a person in nothing but problems all of their life, because they just keep trying to hide it, instead of ever getting to the core of what's causing it.
Yeah, it's you might not know this about me, but I'm also a paramedic. And when one of the things that we're taught in paramedic school, which I'm sure doctors are taught it too, right? But when somebody comes, they have symptoms, right? And you can treat the symptoms, but you're only going to get so far treating the symptoms, because the problem's not going to go away. It's just going to continue. It's going to continue to happen. So somebody's having trouble breathing, I can give them oxygen. That'll help them breathe temporarily. But if I don't figure out, are they having trouble breathing because they're having an asthma attack, or because they're having an anaphylactic reaction to an allergic reaction to something, 2 different treatments, 2 different ways to solve it. I'm not going to solve the problem, and it's just going to get worse, even though I've given them something to treat the symptom that they're exhibiting. And what we tend to do is we tend to do the window dressing. We tend to fix the thing, that the external thing that we're seeing,
Yeah.
and we don't do the work to figure out what's going on internally to fix the underlying problem. So it's just going to keep rearing its head in different ways in our lives, and it's a never-ending process.
I love to tell people this because it's the truth. And I really wish more people would actually really think about it. Success is our birthright. We're born to be successful. All of life exists to be successful. It is the modus operandi behind life itself. If it was not to be successful, life would not exist. It would completely cease to exist. So when we're not being successful, something is wrong. And here's another thing. Success is not difficult. I don't care what you hear or who you hear it from. It is not difficult when you understand how to think successfully, because all success is based on is the law of cause and effect. If you understand the correct causes for the effects that you desire, you can implement them, and it is not difficult. Difficulty and struggle happen in one place, and that is in our mind. It is due to the meaning that we give what we're experiencing and the skill set in which we have to actually work through and solve a problem.
This is incredible and enlightening. One of the things that you talked about before is this idea of failure, that when we don't succeed at something, it means that we go into this downward negative spiral from it. And one of the things that I share on the podcast all the time, it reminded me of, is I tell our listeners, I tell my coaching clients, the entire business is an experiment. Everything you're doing is an experiment. You have to act like a scientist. When a scientist has an experiment that they're trying and it doesn't work, it fails, do they get angry or upset about it? No, it's a data point. It's okay, this didn't work. That's good information to know, because now I know not to try this and I know to try something else.
Exactly.
And that's how we need to approach everything we do every single day in our business, because everything is a learning experience. And it's like in sales where they say, every no is one step closer to a yes.
Yeah.
That's what happens in every area of your business. Is everything that you do, if this didn't work, that's a data point. That's something telling me, okay, that doesn't work. I need to try something else. I need to go a different route. But it's a good thing to have these failures. It's a good thing. And I don't call them failures, but that's what people assume it's a failure. Yeah. It's a good thing to have these things that don't succeed, because that's what makes you succeed. That's what makes you better. Having all of these things, if everything just worked perfectly from day one, we'd have no idea what we did to succeed. We wouldn't be able to replicate it. It's by having these setbacks and having these things not work in our favor is what causes us to know how we got there, because we have to consciously and purposely do something different.
Exactly. I totally agree with you.
Awesome. Well, David, it's been an awesome conversation with you today. What I'm going to do, we're almost out of time. I'm going to ask you, I ask each of our listeners this at the end of the interview, to share one last parting piece of advice to our listeners, and then share with them how they can get in touch with you, follow up with you, learn from you, whatever the next step is for them to be involved in your journey.
So the piece of advice that I would give somebody is to, first and foremost, ask yourself, what do you really want out of life? What do you, and if it's your business, what do you really want out of it? Be really honest with yourself and give yourself permission to want it. Not because you're working because somebody else wants you to, or you're doing things because it's expected of you from somebody else. What do you want for you? The selfish part of you, which is actually a good thing, putting yourself first, right? And then I think admitting that begins to open the door to the journey to really getting what we want out of life. And if anybody wants to know more about what I do, they can check out my podcast, the Successful Mind Podcast. All the information there is completely free, and I give the best of the best information that we have there for people to learn and grow and study and really live the life that they came here to live.
Awesome, David. Thank you. So folks, we're going to link up the podcast in the show notes. So you can literally just click in the description. You can click the link, go and check out David's podcast, or you can search in your podcast player. And you got to go back and listen to this again and take out a notepad and a piece of paper, a pen, and start taking notes, because we've learned so many lessons from David through this conversation, just about looking at yourself and looking at your history and understanding what's really causing this to happen, and the exercise you can do. Hey, what are the things I get angry about, and what's causing me to get angry? Acknowledging that failures are successes, and not getting caught in a downward spiral every time things are not working your way. Don't let things happen to you. Don't be in survival mode. In order to succeed, in order to be successful, you have to get out of survival mode. There's just so many lessons, and I'm not going to rehash the whole episode, but go back and listen to it and glean from it what you can. If this is your first time listening to our podcast, first of all, we're very happy to have you here, but you want to hit the subscribe button so that you know every time we release a new episode, which is twice a week, every Tuesday and Thursday. Tuesday is just me behind the microphone, usually just sharing what's on my mind. Thursday, I have an amazing guest, and we bring only the best, just like David, to you. So we want to make sure that you don't miss another episode of ours. If you've been listening to us for a while, or even if this is your first time, there's somebody out there that you're friends with, that you know that can benefit from today's episode. And what I want to ask is that you literally just share the episode. If you go in your podcast player, there's, you can just click to share. You can click that upload arrow, drop it into somebody else's text message, into their Facebook message, or however you communicate with them, and say, hey, check this out. Because the more people that you can share this with, the more effect that we're going to have on the world around us. And that's why we're here. That's why we're behind this microphone having this conversation, is to help people. So help us help more people. Folks, thank you so much. Until next time, just stay in the game, continue striving to profitability, to success, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Have you been enjoying the show? We sure hope so. To make sure you never miss an episode, be sure to hit the subscribe button in your podcast player app. Next week, we will be back with more valuable resources and ideas on how to break the mold and take your law firm to the next level.